Marcus's hands tremble as he opens the envelope. Inside, a check and a letter. His eyes scan the words. A scholarship fund. In his late wife Angela's name. For families drowning in medical debt. The initial endowment. $5 million. The homeless man who saved her life stares at the billionaire in disbelief. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The impact came from nowhere. A rough hand striking Victoria Ashford's shoulder with enough force to send her stumbling backward onto the sidewalk. Her designer purse flew from her grasp, scattering its contents across the pavement as a delivery truck roared past, missing her by inches. The driver hadn't even slowed, hadn't seen her stepping off the curb while distracted by her phone, arranging yet another nanny interview for her daughter. Victoria sat stunned on the concrete, her heart hammering, blonde hair disheveled, unable to process what had just happened. Above her stood a homeless man, his dark skin weathered by years of exposure, his clothes layered and torn, his eyes wide with the same shock she felt. His hand was still extended from where he'd shoved her, and around them, a small crowd was beginning to gather. "She needs help," someone shouted, rushing toward Victoria. "That man attacked her." "No," Victoria said, finding her voice. "No, he saved me." She looked up at her rescuer, who was already backing away, preparing to disappear into the urban landscape as homeless people learned to do when attention turned their way. "Please, wait." The man hesitated, his expression wary. He was tall, perhaps in his 50s, with gray threading through his short hair and a dignity in his bearing that his circumstances couldn't completely erase. "You're okay," he said simply. "That's what matters." Victoria struggled to her feet, ignoring the concerned hands reaching to help her. Her knee was scraped, her cream-colored suit dirty, but she was alive. "You pushed me out of the way of that truck." "You were looking at your phone," the man said. "Didn't see it coming." Around them, bystanders were photographing the scene with their phones, and Victoria suddenly realized the spectacle they were creating. Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies, one of the wealthiest women under 40 in the country, sitting on a sidewalk having been rescued by a homeless man. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. "What's your name?" Victoria asked, collecting her scattered belongings with hands that still trembled. The man seemed to debate whether to answer. "Marcus. Marcus Webb." "Mr. Webb, I'd like to thank you properly. Can I buy you lunch or breakfast? What meal is it?" Victoria glanced at her watch, realizing she'd lost track of time in her endless cycle of meetings and obligations. Marcus studied her with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see past her expensive clothes and confident demeanor to something underneath. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am. Just be more careful." But Victoria's assistant had already arrived, having been called by a concerned witness. Jennifer took in the scene with practiced efficiency, immediately understanding what had happened and what would come next. "Ms. Ashford, we should get you checked by a doctor. And perhaps we should speak with Mr. Webb privately, away from the cameras." An hour later, Victoria sat across from Marcus, in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant, acutely aware of how out of place he looked among the business lunches and expensive wine. Jennifer had arranged everything, including providing Marcus with a private room to wash up, though he'd politely declined the offer of new clothes. "These are mine," he'd said simply. "They're clean enough." Victoria ordered food, far more than two people could eat, watching as Marcus accepted a cup of coffee with visible gratitude. "How long have you been homeless, Mr. Webb?" 3 years, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the educated diction of someone who'd once inhabited a different world. "Before that, I was a high school teacher. History and civics." "What happened?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "My wife died. Complications from diabetes that we couldn't afford to manage properly. I had insurance through the school, but it wasn't enough when things got bad. The medical bills destroyed us." He took a sip of coffee. "After she died, I couldn't go back to that classroom, couldn't face those kids and pretend to teach them about the American dream when mine had just died in my arms. I took a leave of absence that became a resignation. Lost the apartment, lost everything that connected me to who I used to be. Victoria felt something crack in her chest. She'd built an empire, revolutionized data security, made billions, but she'd never faced the kind of loss that could dismantle a life so completely. I'm sorry. Don't be. I made my choices. Marcus met her eyes directly. But I want you to understand something, Ms. Ashford. I didn't save you because of who you are or what you have. I saved you because you're a human being who was about to get hurt, and I could prevent it, that's all. The food arrived and Victoria watched Marcus eat with careful dignity, never rushing despite what was surely real hunger. They talked about his teaching career, about the students he'd loved, about the history of the city changing around them. Marcus was brilliant, his insights sharp and nuanced, making Victoria wonder how many remarkable people she'd walked past on streets without seeing them. I have a daughter, Victoria said when the meal was winding down. Sophie, she's 8. Her father walked out when she was 3, decided being a parent interfered with his lifestyle. She smiled without humor. I've spent 5 years building my company bigger and bigger, telling myself I was securing her future. But the truth is, I'm hardly ever home. I'm missing her childhood while I sit in boardrooms and negotiate contracts. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked gently. Because today, when I thought I was about to die, my first thought wasn't about my company or my wealth or my reputation. It was about Sophie. About how I'd just scheduled another nanny interview instead of picking her up from school myself. Victoria's voice cracked. You saved my life, Mr. Webb. I want to do something meaningful with that second chance. Over the following weeks, Victoria's act of gratitude began to take shape. She didn't just write Marcus a check, though she did secure him a small apartment and ensure he had resources to rebuild. Instead, she hired him as a consultant for a new initiative at Ashford Technologies, a program to recruit and train individuals experiencing homelessness for positions in tech support and data management. Marcus brought insight that no consultant with a 6-figure fee could match, understanding both the systemic failures that led to homelessness and the potential that still lived in people society had written off. The media attention was intense, but Victoria weathered it, using the platform to advocate for better social safety nets and healthcare reform. Some accused her of PR maneuvering, of using Marcus's story to rehabilitate her image as a detached tech billionaire. She ignored them, focused instead on the work and on the promise she'd made to herself on that sidewalk. But the most profound change came in her relationship with Sophie. Victoria started leaving the office at 5, missing meetings that could be rescheduled, declining dinner obligations that pulled her away from bedtime stories. She brought Sophie to meet Marcus, watching as the former teacher's face lit up around the bright-eyed child who asked endless questions about history and why people ended up homeless and whether dragons were real. Uncle Marcus, as Sophie had taken to calling him, became a regular presence in their lives. He'd completed his training program with top marks and now worked in Ashford Technologies' customer service division, his patience and communication skills making him exceptional at the job. But more than that, he became family in the way that sometimes happened when people who needed each other found each other at exactly the right moment. 6 months after the incident, Victoria hosted a small dinner at her home to celebrate the program's first graduating class. 23 individuals who had been homeless were now employed with benefits, housing assistance, and a support network designed to help them stay stable. Marcus stood beside Victoria as she toasted their success, and Sophie sat nearby, drawing a picture of what she called the day Uncle Marcus saved Mommy. Later, after the guests had left and Sophie was in bed, Victoria and Marcus sat in her study, watching the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. I never thanked you properly, Victoria said, for more than just pushing me out of the way of that truck. For reminding me what matters, Marcus smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. You gave me my life back, Victoria. Purpose, dignity, the chance to teach again, even if it's in a different way. We gave each other something, Victoria corrected. She pulled out an envelope she'd been carrying all evening. But I do have one more, thank you. It's not much. Inside was a check, but also a letter. Marcus read it slowly, his eyes growing wet. It was a scholarship fund established in his late wife's name, specifically for children of families struggling with medical debt. The initial endowment was $5 million. Her name was Angela, Marcus said softly. She would have loved this. Tell me about her, Victoria said, and they talked late into the night, Marcus sharing stories of the woman he'd loved and lost, Victoria listening with the full attention she'd once reserved only for business deals. When Marcus finally left, Victoria checked on Sophie, finding her daughter asleep, with the picture she'd drawn clutched in her small hand. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands, a tall black man, a blonde woman in a business suit, and a small girl. Above them, Sophie had written in careful letters, "My family is bigger now." Victoria thought about the truck she'd never seen coming, about the rough hand that had pushed her to safety, about how being saved sometimes meant saving yourself by opening your eyes to what really mattered. She'd been so busy building an empire that she'd forgotten to build a life. Marcus's act of spontaneous courage had given her the chance to change that, and Sophie's simple drawing showed she was finally getting it right. 1 year after the incident, Ashford Technologies had become known not just for cutting-edge security software, but for its innovative social programs. The homeless hiring initiative had expanded to 6 cities, with a 90% retention rate that shocked even Victoria. Marcus had been promoted to program director, his teaching skills finding new purpose in training and mentoring. But the real transformation was harder to quantify. It lived in Sophie's laughter when Uncle Marcus came for Sunday dinners, in Victoria's newfound balance between ambition and presence, in the way a community of people who'd been invisible had become seen. Sometimes Victoria would pause during her workday and remember that moment on the sidewalk, the truck she hadn't seen, the hand that had saved her. She'd been given a second chance at life, and she was determined not to waste it on anything less than what truly mattered: love, purpose, and the revolutionary act of seeing the humanity in everyone, no matter where they lived or what they'd lost along the way.